I really feel for lawyers who have to persuade juries that real life isn't like CSI. Not every case will have tons of DNA analysis attached, but at the same time, when I read that researchers are sequencing ancient DNA that they got out of the dirt, yeah, I kind of see where those high expectations are coming from. We may not be able to get dinosaur DNA from mosquitoes in amber, but we can get it from some pretty wild places. For instance, yeah, you know in TV shows how they get the DNA from not just a cheek swab, but also things like the bottle of water that the suspect just drank during questioning. In real life, organisms leave samples of DNA everywhere. For instance, you want polar bear DNA, but you don't want to, get close to an actual polar bear. We can get DNA samples from their footprints in the snow. Seriously, in one study a couple years ago, researchers were able to retrieve DNA from 87% of sampled polar bear paw prints, and they could successfully genotype more than half of them on that basis. This is an example of environmental DNA, where you get the DNA not by collecting it directly from the organism that would happily eat you, but by sampling what they leave behind in their environment. We can also get DNA from ancient sources, up to 2 million years old for one mammoth sample. After all, the only reason 23andMe can calculate your Neanderthal ancestry when you give them your sequencing data is because scientists were able to get samples of Neanderthal DNA, right? Given that soft tissue rapidly decomposes, most of the ancient DNA we recover comes from trace amounts left in bones and teeth. And yes, we typically have to alter or destroy those remains in the process of recovering the DNA, but in exchange, we get those sweet, sweet sequences. But hear me out. If we can get environmental DNA, and we can get ancient DNA, how about ancient environmental DNA? Ancient DNA from dirt. Well, first off, how do we even get it, and how would we even know it was ancient? I mean, if you have, say, a cave that Neanderthals and early anatomically modern humans, if you pull environmental DNA from that cave, say, from the dirt, how do you know the DNA came from the ancient humans and not from, I don't know, humans from 100 years ago who walked into the cave barefoot, since apparently we can get DNA samples from animals' freaking footprints? It's a worthwhile question because paleontologists do rely on older stuff bottom of the stack, younger stuff on top. We use this system called stratigraphy in geology to approximate fossil dates and rock from millions of years ago. But it works for paleontologists looking at smaller, microstratigraphic timescale as well. The idea being that if you get sediment samples from a given layer, any biological material you find in the sediment is likely from that time period. And in the case of today's studies, our paleoecologists use these principles to do something very cool. Track how late Pleistocene humans and large carnivores used caves as shelters over time. After all, you might have noticed how all those ancient carnivores have names like cave lion and cave hyena, yeah? And at the same time, humans of the period, also big into caves with like the cave paintings and all. But of course, the competition for housing got serious, and we see these large carnivores disappear from the fossil record. Cave hyenas are gone from the European archaeological record by about 31,000 years ago, and European cave lions are out of the record about 14,000 years ago. But here's the thing. The fossil record depends on skeletal remains, and a detailed fossil record relies on having the right parts of the skeleton to be able to tell what species you're looking at. Paleontologists make some truly incredible inferences from limited data, but at the end of the day, it's hard to figure out what carnivore you're dealing with when all you have are 2 ribs and a vertebrae, you know? But we can look for ancient DNA in sedimentary samples whether or not there are any skeletal remains at all. So yes, theoretically, we could look for samples in caves with no fossils at all, but instead, our researchers use this technique to supercharge exploration of a cave known to be a site for ancient humans. El Mirón Cave in Cantabria, Spain. El Mirón is best known for its cave paintings and for the skeletal remains of the Red Lady of El Mirón, so named for the non-local ochre pigment that covered her bones. She lived about 18,700 years ago, but the region around El Mirón is known to be a site for cave-dwelling animals and humans alike for a long time before the Red Lady as well. So our paleoecologists get samples from lower stratigraphic layers, meaning earlier than the Red Lady, ranging from more than 31,000 years ago to about 20,000 years ago, so around or just a little bit before her time. Through those layers, they recovered DNA evidence of 28 different animal species that had lived in that cave over time. Cave lions, leopards, wolves, bears, but also Iberian wild goats, red deer, hares, and even woolly mammoth. About half of those were novel findings, like evidence of spotted hyenas in the Magdalenian period, which is the same as the period of the Red Lady of El Mirón. And that actually pushes back the archaeological record of the cave hyena's extinction date by thousands of years. All this archaeozoological evidence from DNA in dirt. No, this is not the first study ever to use sedimentary DNA to look for ancient samples. In fact, we needed previous studies to validate things like, does sedimentary DNA tend to stay in the stratigraphic layer it's chronologically from, or does it move around? If we didn't have studies like that, we wouldn't be able to do any of this dating approximation with any reliability. Rather, this study is a great example of what paleoecologists can do with this technique and how far sequencing has come in paleontology. Sedimentary DNA recovery isn't always going to produce stellar results like these. All ancient DNA recovery is going to be easier in cold or dry conditions where DNA is less likely to degrade. But this got us tons of data about animals we would have had no clue were ever even there if we'd just gone off of only the skeletal remains we found in the area. And we get all of this DNA information without disrupting any skeletal remains we do find. So, paleontologists can get ancient DNA from dirt now, and it is great data. No, of course, no, of course, that's a thing they can do. I swear it's science like this that gives us our unrealistic expectations. And scientists, don't ever stop.